Madam President, I'm happy to be the first to take the distinguished majority leader up on his offer and be here on the floor to talk about this very important matter. Madam President, I plan on voting no on this proposal. It's a very important matter. It's in many ways the greatest challenge we face as a nation. So I don't come to this decision lightly, but I do come to it firmly for three primary reasons: change our spending and debt picture. It just plays around the margins. It doesn't make any big change whatsoever. To put it differently, I don't want to default under any circumstances, but I don't want a downgrade of our credit rating either. And from everything the markets and the credit rating agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, have said for months, this would result in a downgrade. This would result in higher interest rates, first for the government and then for all of us, on our home mortgages, on our car payments, and everything else. Why? Because, again, it doesn't fundamentally change our spending and debt picture. It only cuts $7 billion in the first year and $3 billion in the second year, a total in the first 2 years of $10 billion. That's basically a minuscule rounding error in terms of the size of the federal budget. Over the next 10 years, we continue to mount up new debt, $7 trillion worth of new debt. So we're at 14 now. We're going to add on another $7 trillion of new debt under this plan, and we do nothing to stabilize our debt to GDP ratio, which is perhaps the most important metric that economists and others point to. We need to do better. We need to have some plan to balance the budget. This plan never balances. This plan has mountains of new debt still building. This plan never stabilizes our debt to GDP ratio. So again, I don't want to default. I'll vote to avoid a default, but I don't want a downgrade either that costs every American in a really meaningful way. Secondly, I've looked very hard at the enforcement provisions of this bill, and I'm convinced that even the meager numbers in this bill in terms of cuts are going to be blown or going to be waived because there is no meaningful enforcement. The only thing that it will take to bust the numbers in this bill is a new bill that passes by a simple majority in the House and by 60 votes in the Senate. And we are constantly looking at those sorts of vehicles, particularly when we're probably going to have disaster appropriations and disaster bills coming to the Congress. So there are no real teeth in this bill. There is not adequate enforcement. To their credit, several members of this body, several members of the House have spent months talking about how good, meaningful enforcement mechanisms could work. The Gang of Six had real enforcement mechanisms that they spent a lot of time on. Senators here like Bob Corker had meaningful enforcement mechanisms built into their proposed legislation. None of those are in this bill. Those could easily have been adopted. Those could easily have been put in the bill. They were not. And third and finally, I'm very concerned that triggers in this bill that are supposed to be there to ensure a second round of savings and deficit reduction just aren't going to work. I don't see how they're going to incent, particularly the Democrats, particularly the left, to move to a new package of savings and deficit reduction. I think rather the triggers will be triggered and we'll have unsustainable defense cuts and also unsustainable cuts to doctors and hospitals in Medicare. That's perhaps another reason, going back to point number 2, that even the numbers in this bill aren't going to hold. They're going to be waived. They're going to be busted. I have to say, I hope I'm wrong on all 3 counts if this bill, in fact, passes. But I've looked at it carefully, soberly, and that's the clear conclusion I've come to. I hope we can do better. I hope we do better because we must for the American people, because we need to start turning around our completely unsustainable spending and debt situation.